What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. Today's 4-man pod features the return of Robert playing his mono-black Erebos God of the Dead deck. This deck looks to use his life total as a resource in order to draw cards and also generate large amounts of mana so we can ultimately win with a giant Torment of Hailfire or by repeatedly casting Great Merchant of Asphodel. Next, we have our friend Javonn making his first appearance on the channel, playing his fully blinged out Locust God deck. This deck looks to wheel his opponents into submission while simultaneously creating an almost infinite amount of Locust tokens in order to swarm the board for victory. Then we have Fog playing one of his favorite Kamigawa decks, Skyfire Kirin. This deck looks to take advantage of Skyfire's triggered ability by casting multiple spirits and arcane spells in order to steal his opponent's creatures for his own personal use. Last but not least, we have Justin playing his budget Yuriko the Tiger Shadow deck. This deck looks to deal as much combat damage with as many ninjas as he possibly can in order to trigger Yuriko's ability as many times as possible and kill the entire table with his high CMC split cards. Now let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Fog starts off the game by drawing, playing a tapped Path of Ancestry and passing his turn. Justin plays an island. Then he taps one and casts a Mist-Cloaked Herald and passes his turn to Robert. Robert draws for a turn, plays a Swamp, taps for Dark Ritual, which he then uses to cast Sign in Blood, drawing 2, losing 2 life, and then plays a Sensei's Divine top before passing the turn. Javonn plays an island and then passes the turn to Fog. At the beginning of his turn, Fog draws, then he plays a tapped Flamekin Village and taps his path for red and casts a Frostling, scrying one off the trigger, then passes his turn to Justin. Justin draws, plays a Swamp, then he goes to attacks and swings the Mist-Cloaked Herald at Robert. And after no blocks are declared, he ninjutsus in his commander Yuriko, and off the Yuriko trigger, he reveals a Ninja of the New Moon, dealing 5 damage to everybody and then passes his turn. At the beginning of his turn, Robert taps 1 and he uses his top to look at the top 3 cards of his library. Draws for turn, plays a Swamp, and passes to Javonn. Javonn plays an island for turn. Then he taps 2 and he casts Arcane Signet before passing the turn to Fog. At the beginning of the third turn, Fog draws for turn, plays a Mountain. Then he taps 2 and he casts Spawning Pit, and he swings 1 at Justin with the Frostling, take him down to 39 before passing his turn. Justin untaps for turn, draws, plays a tapped Bad River, and then taps 1 to cast the Mist-Cloaked Herald again before going to attacks and swinging Yuriko at Javonn for 1. After damage is dealt, he reveals the top card of his library and it's Omen of the Sea, so everybody takes 2 damage. Before the beginning of his turn, Robert tops, looks at his top 3, goes his upkeep, draws, plays a Swamp, then taps 3 and casts Cunning Rhetoric, and then passes the turn. Javonn untaps for turn, draws, plays another island, then he taps 3 and he casts Dak Faden. He then upticks Dak Faden to draw 2, discarding 2. Fog untaps all his permanents, draws, plays another mountain. Then he taps out, and he casts his commander, Skyfire Kirin, and he scries 1 off the Path of Ancestry trigger and passes the turn to Justin. At the beginning of Justin's turn, he untaps, cracks his Bad River, and he goes and finds an untapped Sunken Hollow. After which, he also plays a Sea of the Synod as his land for turn. He then taps 2, and he casts Omen of the Sea, scrying 2 and drawing a card. After which, he goes to combat, and he swings both of his creatures at Javonn. After no blocks are declared, he taps 1, and he ninjutsus in a Mistblade Shinobi, dealing damage to 2 ninjas and getting 2 triggers, revealing Vault of Whispers and Rags to Riches, which deals 11 damage to each of us. After we all take our damage, Justin taps another island and he plays Mist-Cloaked Herald and passes his turn to Robert. At the beginning of Robert's turn, he untaps, he tops, draws, taps 2, and casts a Demon Horn before passing his turn to Javonn. Javonn untaps, draws, can't find anything better to do, so he Dak Fadens, and after discarding 2, he taps 1 to play Sleight of Hand, looking at 2 cards and putting one on the bottom. He then plays a mountain for turn, and he taps 3, and he casts Ashnod's Altar. Then he passes his turn. At the beginning of the next turn, Fog untaps his lands, draws, plays another mountain, taps 2, casts a Sorcerer's Broom, then taps another 2, and casts a Bubbling Cauldron. He then goes to combat and swings Skyfire at Justin for 3 commander damage, take him down to 36, and then passes his turn. At the beginning of Justin's turn, he untaps all of his permanents, draws for turn, plays the Vault of Whispers he revealed earlier, and then swings all of his creatures at Javonn. After no blocks are declared, he then taps 4, and he ninjutsus in his Ninja of the New Moon. Off of this, gets 3 triggers, and he reveals a Throat Slitter, a Murderous Cut, and a Corpulent Corpse, dealing 14 damage to all of us, which was enough damage along with the combat damage to take Javonn out of the game. He then passes his turn. Robert goes to the beginning of his turn, draws, plays a Swamp, and then decides to just pass his turn to Fog. At the beginning of my turn, I untap all of my permanents, draw for turn, play another mountain, I then tap 4, and I cast a Hate Mirage targeting Yuriko and the Ninja of the New Moon. I then swing both at Justin, and I get the Yuriko triggers revealing a Phyrexian Arena and a Blinding Anger off the top of my library, which deals 7 damage to each of my opponents, which will take Robert out, so in retaliation, he uses his Murderous Rider to take out my Skyfire Kirin before he dies. With that on the stack, I decided to take my Skyfire Kirin, tap 1, and sacrifice it to my Bubbling Cauldron in order to gain 4 life, going up to 12. After which, I take my Frostling, sacrifice it to give Mistblade Shinobi -1/-1, and I sack the 2 tokens to my spawning pit before passing my turn. At the beginning of Justin's turn, he untaps, draws, plays an island, then he taps 2, and he casts a Key to the City. He then uses the Key to the City by tapping it and discarding a card to make Yuriko unblockable. And he goes to combat, swinging both his ninjas at me. I use my Sorcerer's Broom and I chump block the Ninja of the New Moon, taking damage from Yuriko. But with the Yuriko trigger on the stack, he taps 3 and he sacks his Omen to scry 2. And then he reveals a Cosign to Oblivion, dealing 7 damage to me. He then passes his turn. At the beginning of the next turn, I untap all of my lands, draw for turn, then I tap 4, and I cast Blind with Anger, stealing his Ninja of the New Moon, and I swing it at him for 6 damage, after which I tap 1 and sack it to my Bubbling Cauldron to gain 4 life, and I pass my turn. Justin untaps for turn, draws, plays an Ornithopter, then plays an island, then swings Yuriko at me, and off the Yuriko trigger, he reveals a Moth Dust Changeling, dealing 1 damage to me. Then he taps 1, and he casts a Moth Dust Changeling before passing his turn. At the beginning of my turn, I untap my lands, draw for turn, then decide to tap 4, and get myself out of this predicament by casting Grab the Reins targeting Yuriko, which Justin then counterspells. With no other options left, I tap 1 and I use my Spawning Pit to create a spawn token. But before the end of my turn, Justin casts a Cosign, bouncing the spawn back to my hand. But with that on the stack, I decide to tap 1 and sack to my Cauldron, gaining 4 life before passing my turn. At the beginning of Justin's turn, he untaps his permanents and draws, plays another island, then goes to combat, swinging all of his creatures at me. I have no blocks. So with no blocks being declared, he taps enough to bounce the Ornithopter back to his hand and then Jitsu in Higari the Stillwind. And with 3 triggers on the stack, he reveals an Azure Smoke Shaper into the story in a swamp, which is enough to deal 11 damage to me, taking me out of the game. Today's big winner was none other than the Dimir mastermind himself, Justin, piloting his Yuriko deck. This game was a great example of just how powerful Yuriko can be, even built on a restricted budget. Also a great example of why she's such a strong CDH commander. Today's MVP card of the game was Robert's Murderous Rider. Unbeknownst to Justin, I had all the cards in my hand in order to ensure my victory until Robert destroyed my commander before he died out of spite. But such is life. Thanks for watching, and be on the lookout for more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.